Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 13th edition already of the Arctic Futures Symposium. I am Nicolas van Hoecke. I'm the Managing Director of the International Polar Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you here today. Whether it's in person, most of the people, country of last year, it's in person. We have, unfortunately, a train strike, so we will have a few people online, but we're very happy to welcome you here. Setting up this symposium is a beautiful exercise of coordination, because I would also like to take the opportunity to thank all the partners, our teams at the foundation, but also the partners that have helped us create the program and coordinate everything. Namely, and I'm going to read to not to forget anyone, of course, our friends from Canada, the US, Finland, Iceland, the Faroes, Norway, Greenland, Sweden, the Polar Institute, and of course the European institutions. Thanks to everyone. Before I introduce the various keynote speakers, we will start with 6 keynote speakers today. Before we go to panel discussions, I would like to share with you a message received from Alain Hubert. Alain Hubert, as some of you may know, is the founder and the president of the International Polar Foundation and has arrived yesterday in Antarctica, the other side of the world for the topics today. So they have arrived with our teams on Thursday, and he would like to share a message with all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Director General, State Secretary, Your Excellencies, Ministers, Members of Parliament, distinguished speakers and participants from around the Arctic and from near or at hand. It is with great pleasure that I would like to welcome you to the 13th edition of the Arctic Future Symposium. Despite being many thousands of kilometers away at the Princess Elisabeth Antarctica, the first zero-emissions polar research station, I'm in spirit with you as you discourse on matters close to my heart. I'm particularly pleased to see that so many people have come here today and that many eminent speakers have graced us with their presence to discuss issues that are of great importance to Arctic stakeholders and inhabitants. We would also like to thank all our partner organizations whose contribution have helped make this event possible. They represent much of the Arctic, and their support is crucial to the pertinence and wide-ranging impact of this event. Over the next 2 days, we will discuss many vital issues impacting the future in the Arctic. Arctic governance and strategies, the role of Arctic stakeholders, research cooperation, energy and resource, innovation, and what makes the Arctic a special place to live and work. These are compelling discussions that have been chosen for you this year by consensus of the stakeholders. We will also announce the first winner of the Laurence Tran Arctic Futures Award. With the support of the Tran family, the International Polar Foundation has established an annual prize of €7,500 to be awarded to entrepreneur or a startup exploring sustainable solutions to problems they face in their own Arctic community, as a means of encouraging young entrepreneurs to consider how to contribute in a concrete manner to their communities and their countries. With the International Polar Foundation, we explored ways to reduce the environmental impact of scientific research in Antarctica. We designed and built the Princess Elisabeth Antarctica to run exclusively on renewable energy. In keeping with our philosophy of positive action, the Foundation wishes to encourage the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs to imagine concrete actions to combat environmental problems wherever they may live. As here in Antarctica, we start the austral summer research season, assisting scientists in their study of the complexity of the Earth system. We wish all of you a wonderful symposium in Brussels and hope that you will take away from this experience many positive messages of hope for the future. Thank you.
There's not much I can add to what Alain has just said. We will have an exciting 2 days, day and a half, and we will, as Alain pointed out as well, very important, awards, hand over the first award, the Law on Strand Arctic Future Award, but that is for tomorrow. I would now like to start the symposium. We have, as I said, 6 keynote speakers. It is my pleasure to welcome on stage our first keynote speaker, Angelina Eichhorst, Managing Director of the European External Affairs Service. Ms. Eichhorst, the floor is yours.
A very warm welcome to all of you. May I first congratulate the organizers for the fantastic photo, Christian Klauers. It gives us immediately the feeling where we are and what we are discussing. And I want to thank the organizers for gathering this very impressive audience together to reinforce our cooperation, and we have a lot of discussions out there. As was said, I'm here on behalf of EU High Representative Vice President Josep Borrell. I'm most grateful for the invitation extended to us to address this year's symposium, the HRVP. He really asked me to extend a warm welcome, and also give a special mention for all of those who have been organizing this symposium annually since 2010. A lot of hard work behind all of this. At this very point in time, like-minded partners, countries, organizations, entities, people need to line up more urgently, more visibly, more effectively. The language of the European Union is a language of upholding international law. The United Nations Charter, our commitment to constructive dialogue and to reinforce multilateral cooperation. And so are our actions. The European Security Order is under threat. As for the Arctic, and in the context of today's symposium, we do not see the ongoing aggression and tensions obviously originating from the high north. That's clear. But it is true that during recent years, Russia has reinforced its military assets across the Arctic regions, and Russian military exercises have become much more prevalent than they were 2 decades ago. The Arctic states, as well as many of our NATO partners, have responded by increasing their surveillance and by conducting large exercises. Ladies and gentlemen, we, the European Union, 27 member states, will continue to work for a safe, stable, sustainable, peaceful and prosperous Arctic. Our ambitions for Arctic cooperation and development, they are set out in our policy paper. You know it, a joint paper with the European Commission, High Representative and the Commission developed and released this together, a stronger EU engagement for a peaceful, sustainable, prosperous Arctic. It was done in October 2021. We jointly stress that the EU's ambitions for Arctic cooperation are steadfast, and we will continue to work together with the member states on the next steps. We like to say the EU is in the Arctic. The Arctic is in the EU. There is the understanding, of course, that the Arctic states continue to hold the primary responsibility for tackling challenges within their territories. Yet many issues affecting the Arctic regions and its people can be more effectively addressed through regional and multilateral cooperation. We've seen that at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, it's a case in point, both in terms of the importance of global cooperation and of the challenges in reaching effective agreements. This is not easy. We know that. But there is a full understanding and willingness in the EU that effective regional multilateral cooperation is now more important than ever. With our overall aim to strengthen our Arctic engagement, our main objectives can be brought into 3 areas, very brief, you know them: contributing to keeping the Arctic safe, stable, by supporting the cooperation I mentioned, but also particularly developing the strategic foresight on emerging social, economic, and where it emerges also on security challenges. Second, taking strong action to tackle climate change and environmental degradation. Science and research play a pivotal role. We know all the details. It will come certainly more to the fore during the discussions. And thirdly, and most importantly, support the inclusive and sustainable development of the regions to the benefit of all habitants and future generations. Men, women, youth, invest in future, Arctic Futures Forum, invest in future-oriented jobs, sustainable green and blue sectors of the economy, with full respect for the rights of indigenous peoples. It's very clear when we talk about job creation and you get 300, 500 people into a village or an area where you have 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants, that this may create tensions. It creates change and it may create tensions. But then we have to address this together. Together in the whole set of the challenges we have. Infrastructure across the most vulnerable parts of the Arctic regions. Some may have to be refurbished. Other parts may see a managed retreat, as we call it, due to the effects of the climate change. This will affect Alaska, Canada, Russia. As you know, approximately 60% of Russian territory sits on permafrost. Biodiversity. It will come under pressure, we know, affecting not least the vitally important fishing industries in the Arctic regions. And thirdly, we expect to see a vast increase in the demand for raw materials and the metals located in the Arctic regions. Materials which are essential for the transition to a climate-neutral and digital economy. Cobalt, nickel, some rare earth elements. In this context, we have been pursuing a very ambitious agenda in the areas of raw materials in particular, including through the establishment of partnerships with our closest partners, United States and Canada, others. And there is a potential for, in all of this social tension in the most contested areas where such resources are located. We are fully aware. We've seen the legal cases brought by local inhabitants, indigenous people representatives in certain jurisdictions. This all shows how delicate this is. And therefore, I think our key message is the importance of listening and understanding the priorities of the indigenous people, of young people. This cannot be overestimated. These are all hugely important issues, all on the agenda for you to discuss. We need to fully realize the geopolitical dynamics, the local transformations, and all of this will result in changes we need to manage together. We can contribute. The European Union wants to contribute in a way where we all feel we are part of the work that needs to be done. I hope this will be a fruitful symposium with all of you here. Let us try to stay focused, and let us also mostly concentrate on very concrete action these days to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eichhorst. We keep well note of a few of your key messages, the importance of international law, of multilateral collaboration, the message that the EU wants to strengthen its Arctic engagement, and of course, listening to the indigenous people and working, and we will also touch upon that later today or tomorrow. And I would like to invite our second keynote speaker, Ms. Charlina Vitcheva, the Director General of DG MARE. Ms. Vitcheva, please be my guest.
Thank you very much, and I will start with many thanks for this invitation. I'm really happy to see so many Arctic friends in the room, despite the strike. Really happy to be here. Our Directorate General actually leads the file on the Arctic, and indeed we were working very closely with the External Action Service to see how we can update the strategy last year. As Angelina said at the beginning, indeed much has changed in the Arctic since the last Future Symposium in 2021. I fully echo what my colleague said with regard to the Russian aggression. It has changed completely the context in which we are all working in the Arctic. This totally legal and unjustified aggression against Ukraine impacted the overall cooperation, because the cooperation is indeed at the heart of our joint work. There is nothing that can happen in the Arctic without this cooperation, and everybody agrees that Russia has a very big stake out there and cannot be neglected. So this aggression has impacted the whole context enormously. Angelina was focusing very much on the geopolitical developments, but they are not the only threat, and or even we can say in the long term not the most important threat for the Arctic to face. We have stated in the 2021 policy update, and I will reiterate today, that the main threat to the Arctic still remains, and to the planet, not just to the Arctic, the climate change and its impacts. Within the warming rates of several times over the planet faces and the global average, climate change is already changing enormously the Arctic. Climate change is impacting the infrastructure, sitting on permafrost, and I was listening to Angelina saying that the Russian territory is 60% on permafrost, so that should be very much dear to their heart. It affects migration patterns of species, and we feel it enormously in our DG because we deal with the fisheries resources very much. It reduces the thickness and the formation time of the sea ice. It increases the risk of natural hazards, and we see so many of these happening at both in terms of scale and in terms of how often they come, like floods or wildfires, which was not the case in the past. For example, the wildfires in Siberia. It contributes inevitably to the rising of sea levels. And it actually decreases the territory of Greenland. So we are confronted even more with unknown challenges of tipping points being reached. And we know that the tipping points, once reached, they have enormous cascading effects we still don't know. These are just some of the worrisome examples of how climate change is already having a measurable negative impact in the Arctic and on Arctic communities. I was really happy to see that Alain was speaking far from the other pole in the Antarctic, where the challenges are more or less the same. So the poles actually experience the biggest impact of the reckless policy we have with regard to climate change. In addition, climate change is unfortunately exacerbated by and linked to biodiversity loss and pollution in a very negative feedback loop. And as we all know, the Arctic as an ecosystem in delicate balance, very delicate balance, is particularly vulnerable to all these phenomena. The Arctic also faces human, societal, and economic challenges, and those must not be overlooked, and we heard some of it mentioned by Angelina. Sustainable economic development and availability of attractive jobs are essential for the competitiveness in the Arctic, to attract and retain talent and people who do not only live and work, but also thrive and enjoy living in the region. Access to services and coverage of basic needs must be ensured both in urban and in rural areas, reducing, for instance, health inequalities or increasing connectivity access, which enables an array of digital services, including health, educational, and administration services. We must address inequalities driven by depopulation and unbalanced economic growth, where some parts of the Arctic grow, but at the expense of other areas. Traditional livelihoods, cultures, and languages must also be protected. We must listen, as Angelina said, to the voices of those who live in the Arctic, in particular indigenous peoples. And I recall from the Arctic Circle Forum, it's not just listening, it's about doing everything together. And we must pay special attention to the voice of the youth and everything that youth wants to do together. Because they're going to own the world of today and tomorrow. Some of these challenges are also exacerbated by climate change, such as health, economic and social risks posed by thawing permafrost, or the increasing risk of food production, for instance, for fisheries or aquaculture, but also reindeer husbandry or salmon runs. We must all also have in mind that Arctic is not the same everywhere. It is not a monolithic region, and that the fact that there are many Arctics, geographically, demographically, economically, or socially. Even though we speak of Arctic matters, specific analysis must be carried out, and tailored approaches must be ensured and developed. These are some of the challenges the European Union has identified in the Arctic policy, and when addressing these challenges, the European Union has a very comprehensive and holistic approach, and most importantly, putting people first. The European Union is seeking solutions to these challenges at different levels within the Arctic, and the EU as well does that bilaterally and globally. And I'm absolutely convinced, and it was reflected in our new Arctic policy, but also by the developments of the Arctic Circle events, that everybody now understands that the Arctic impacts the globe, the planet. So that's why it is not a matter only for the Arctic, but for the whole planet, and vice versa, the whole planet actually, with its responsible or irresponsible actions, impacts the Arctic. So this connection is growing stronger. The European Union Arctic policy brings our actions together in a whole of government approach, maximizing synergies and building on our strengths. In fact, many of the EU programs and initiatives have a direct or indirect positive effect and impact on the Arctic, and they're also part of the overall umbrella of the European Green Deal. We continue advancing with the green and digital transition, promoting environmental protection, fostering prosperity, supporting indigenous people, promoting people-to-people contacts, working together on energy, critical materials, civil protection or health, and at the same time further strengthening and promoting our common values. We are working towards reducing vulnerabilities and inequalities, mitigating against and adapting for changes caused by climate change and other challenges in the Arctic, and overall improving societal resilience. We are increasing our presence in the Arctic, for instance, through a new Commission office in Nuuk. That was one of the concrete actions that are part of our renewed Arctic strategy. It will open doors in 2023, but also deepening communication and exchange with Arctic representatives, including regions and municipalities, as well as indigenous peoples. We regularly exchange with Arctic stakeholders, talking to those living in the region, and we continue with our EU Arctic Forum and Indigenous Peoples Dialogue, which will take place in 2023 in the Arctic, It will take place in Nuuk, in Greenland, on the 8th and 9th of February, something that I hope is marked in your calendar already. We are empowering our young Arctic voices, providing the means to build capacity. There was a call for such projects very recently, and to participate for them in high-level fora where their messages can be heard loud and clear as part of the dialogue, as part of the joint action, and not from a distance. The EU brings about positive change in and for the Arctic, for instance, by implementing, as I said, European Green Deal, but very much supporting research. And this foundation is very much focused on the research. That's why I would like to mention that under Horizon Europe, many of you know that we have the Mission Ocean, but it was only last week that the lighthouse, because we implement the Mission Ocean through lighthouses in sea basins, only last week we had the launch of the lighthouse for North Atlantic and the Arctic. It was launched in Cork, and we are looking forward to you joining the charter of this lighthouse through your research projects, but also business projects based on sustainability. If you need some more information, you can always reach us through the website, or you can reach me personally. I have my colleagues here as well. So we also enable a lot of action through a Copernicus program. We have a marine service there. We have our civil protection mechanism in terms of the much more often floods and various natural hazards. This is of huge importance for everyone that deals with the Arctic. And we also provide very much, like Angelina said, freedom, respect, predictability, rule of law, and prosperity for the region. And we are doing all that with the Arctic states, with the stakeholders and partners. The European Union works to promote inclusive, fair, and sustainable development to address all these multiple challenges the region faces, and to keep the Arctic safe, stable, and prosperous. For this, we need a lot of knowledge. And I use the opportunity to say that our enabler in this respect is Digital Twin Ocean, which is part of our Mission Ocean, and we are looking forward for you participating in this grand scientific research project. So be sure that we are a reliable partner. We share the vision for equality and prosperity. You can count on us, and we are counting on you, because we are in the Arctic, and Arctic is in the European Union, as Angelina said. Thank you very much for your attention. Wish you very fruitful discussions throughout the 2 days.
Thank you, Ms. Vitcheva. I'm not sure where to start. On many points you touched upon, the changing context, of course, due to the Russian aggression, the even more important threat, which is climate change. I also remember that you invite people to come to you regarding the Lighthouse project, and an appointment has been taken already in February 23, the 8th and the 9th, I think, in Nuuk. It's a whole program. We wrote it down. Thank you very much. Next, it's our honor to have with us an invite for some remarks, the State Secretary of Norway, Mr. Eivind Petersson. Mr. Petersson, would you give us the honors of your presence here on stage, please?
Distinguished guests, friends of the Arctic, it is a pleasure for me to be here today because the Arctic Future Symposium is indeed a welcome venue for discussing Arctic issues in the heart of Europe here in Brussels, especially at this time. Until recently, Arctic cooperation had remained largely unaffected by geopolitical tensions elsewhere. The saying went that the cold winds of the Arctic seldom originated in the Arctic. Still, the Arctic remains a well-regulated region. An extensive legal governance framework, including the law of the sea, applies to the Arctic. This framework provides clarity and predictability with regards to duties, rights, and jurisdiction for all activity in the region. But the Arctic has also been affected by Russia's illegal and brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 24th of February was a watershed moment for us all, for European security, for multilateral cooperation globally, but also cooperation in the Arctic. Much has changed, but key elements of Norway's Arctic outlook remains the same. We continue to work for a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Arctic. We focus on core Arctic issues like the impacts of climate change, sustainable management of resources, and enabling people to live good lives in the region. Only then can we build a solid foundation for Arctic resilience. Instead of talking about the Arctic as a single region, we should really talk about the Arctic regions, with big differences in climate, development, and demography between them. For Norway, the Arctic is home to about 9% of our population and a large part of our modern, highly developed society. Indeed, I spent my own childhood growing up far north of the Arctic Circle in a town that was back then in the 1980s, a border town, just a few kilometers away from, in the 1980s, the only border between NATO and Soviet Russia. Today, my government gives high priority to further developing Northern Norway as a strong, dynamic, and highly competent region. We know that the Arctic is warming at a pace 4 times faster than the rest of the world. Scientists are now fearing that even with very low emissions, ice-free summers in the Arctic are becoming inevitable, are becoming reality even before 2050. The rapid warming stems mainly from activities and emissions outside the Arctic. It is our common responsibility to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. And together with the EU, Norway is proud of conducting an ambitious climate policy. Long-term and serious investments in science and research is needed to understand the impacts of climate change and how to mitigate the consequences. We encourage the development of world-leading research communities and technology hubs in the Arctic. Our hope is that emerging green solutions and industries will become the building blocks for the sustainable Arctic communities of the future. This requires that we create opportunities for families, workers, scientists, students, and businesses alike, all while ensuring that the rights and interests of indigenous peoples are protected and considered, and being very mindful of possible environmental impacts. To enable Arctic communities to thrive, also in the face of new challenges, we must find a balance between protection and sustainable use. Norway is pleased to have the EU as a close partner in these issues. The EU programs such as Interreg, Horizon Europe, and Erasmus+, just 3 examples, are valuable tools for advancing cooperation and knowledge and promoting development in the Arctic. Russia's war against Ukraine has fundamental consequences for European security and for the Arctic. For Norway, sharing a border with Russia, it has had profound and immediate impact on our foreign and security policy. Norway stands together with our allies in our support for Ukraine, and we will continue to provide substantial military, economic, and humanitarian support for Ukraine for as long as necessary. Unity remains crucial for standing up against Russia's aggression and ambitions. We have aligned with the EU sanctions and implement them continuously in Norwegian national legislation. A robust Norwegian Arctic is a matter of national importance, both in terms of maintaining resilient societies in the north and a strong military presence. We are strengthening our defense and facilitating allied training in our northern regions. We are also following Russian military activity in our region closely. This is important for us and for NATO. And we coordinate our activity with allies and are transparent and predictable, contributing thereby to stability. Finnish and Swedish NATO membership will strengthen the NATO alliance and make the Nordic region more secure. We are therefore supporting their path to membership in any way we can. After the 24th of February, we have downscaled our bilateral cooperation with Russia to a minimum. there can be no business as usual with the current political regime in Moscow. But as a predictable and responsible neighbor, we seek to minimize risks of misunderstandings and unintended escalation. This requires a degree of cooperation and communication with the authorities in some areas, such as border control, coast guard, search and rescue, and sustainable management of common resources in the Barents Sea. Over the years, the Arctic states have successfully established effective platforms for discussion and decision-making in the Arctic. Forums such as the Arctic Council, the Barents Euro-Arctic Council, and the Northern Dimension have contributed to peace and stability. The inclusion of indigenous peoples, youth, and the regional and local levels in matters of Arctic governance has made these fora both unique and irreplaceable, reminding us that local stakeholders play a crucial role in the sustainable development of the Arctic. Multilateral cooperation in the Arctic, broadly speaking, has been a success story, and not something we are ready to give up on. When faced with difficult times, we must demonstrate our resilience. Russia's aggression in Ukraine have left us unable to continue as we did before. But cross-border challenges, such as climate change, are not going to disappear and will still require common efforts. As for the Arctic Council, Norway will take over the chairship from Russia in May next year. Our most important job will be to make sure that the Council can continue its important work, which over the last few decades has contributed so successfully to scientific knowledge about climate change, sustainable resource management, and the well-being of people living in the Arctic. The Arctic is a diverse region, but across the borders we also face many of the same challenges. Norway has a long history of acting as a steady and responsible Arctic state. This responsibility has only grown bigger due to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. But it is a responsibility we are ready to continue to carry as we now prepare to take over the chairship of the Arctic Council in May next year. Thank you very much.
Thank Mr. Petersson. Thank you a lot. Thank you for a very clear position on the Arctic policy of your country, keeping it peaceful, but also sustainable. Also about your ambitious environmental plan that you set up in coordination with the EU, and that also converges a bit with what Ms. Vitcheva said, the importance of keeping in mind that there are different Arctics. It is now also a privilege for us, but this will be online, I think, to have with us the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Ms. Sara Olsvig. Sara, do you hear us? Sara, do you hear us?
I don't know if you hear me, but I don't hear you.
Okay, we hear you. So can we, if you don't hear me, but okay, the floor is yours. Can we give a signal to Sara that she can start her speech? Yeah? Sara,
thank you.
The floor is
now
yours.
I hear you. Excellencies, dear symposium guests and organizers, thank you for the invitation to speak at this important event. I would have been delighted to join you in Brussels, but my schedule unfortunately did not allow for further traveling this time around. I just returned to Nuuk after participating in, among other things, the COP27 in Egypt and a timely and important expert workshop held by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, discussing the enhanced participation of indigenous peoples in the work of the UN Human Rights Council. I will look forward to joining in person at a future event. I speak to you today as the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Our organization was founded in 1977 when the late Eben Hobson Sr. envisioned a circumpolar Inuit organization to strengthen our unity as a people, promote our rights, and represent us on the international arena. Right from the beginning, our focus was on peaceful coexistence in our homeland. Quoting Hobson, Inuit are an international community sharing common language, culture, and a common land along the Arctic coast of Siberia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. Although not a nation state, as a people, we constitute a nation. End of quote. As you will see on the map behind me, we occupy and have traditionally occupied the vast coastlines of our homelands, Inuit Nunat. The Inuit Circumpolar Council, throughout our 45 years of indigenous diplomatic efforts, have successfully affected policy making, and we continue to do so. Through, among others, our provisional consultative status in the International Maritime Organization, our observer status in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, our 4 decades-long ECOSOC accreditation to the UN, we have affected both international policymaking and agreements. Lately, we have participated also in the COP of the Central Arctic Ocean's Fisheries Agreement in South Korea through partnerships with states and governments. We are committed and we call for the recognition of the role of Inuit and our participation in negotiating a new legally binding instrument on the protection and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. We engage to make sure that the interests, the knowledge and the rights of Inuit are not only heard, but are agenda setting and inform negotiations for a stronger result. As we all know, Arctic governance is deeply affected by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. For all Arctic governments, including nation-state governments, self-governing nations, and indigenous representative institutions, our common challenge is to make sure that the spirit and intent of Arctic cooperation as we know it is maintained. We have come together, people to people, and focused on the living conditions of Arctic peoples, on developing and encouraging long-term policies to safeguard our Arctic environment, and on focusing on our social, cultural, and spiritual well-being. This has been done with the effective and meaningful participation of indigenous peoples of the Arctic. Indigenous peoples have been the legitimizing factor for Arctic cooperation. Thus, we have succeeded in building institutions and collaborative bodies for and by us. This unique governance structure must be maintained. It is and will be a challenge, but it is a challenge that we, at this point in history, have an obligation to meet with optimism and with a long-term vision. The Inuit Circumpolar Council was one of the 3 indigenous peoples' organizations who co-founded the Arctic Council, and we wish to work collaboratively to ensure that this important institution will thrive in the future. As a body bringing together peoples from the circumpolar region, we call the Arctic. For us, the Arctic is not an unexplored frontier for new innovations or business developments, or a token in climate change exemplified by the picture of a polar bear on a melting ice float. All this is real, and we live it. The innovation of our ancestors is what made it possible for us to live and survive here. The Arctic is our home, therefore Arctic peoples must be at the forefront of Arctic governance, policymaking, and development. We are not stakeholders. We are peoples with the right of self-determination. We are rights holders. Our organization has taken the lead in ensuring a holistic approach in governing our region. Our environment knows no borders, climate change knows no borders, the pollution crossing into Arctic waters, air and ecosystems knows no borders. It is therefore our prerogative as an Arctic indigenous people living across borders to call for all to recognize the importance of a holistic and cross-border approach to our region. So, the turbulent geopolitical reality we live in today is a challenge for all of us. And how we respond today will be determining not only for the environment and changing climate, but for all Arctic peoples in our years-long efforts to sit side by side on an equal basis, people to people, and build our common Arctic future. We call for a human rights approach to maintain a strong focus on the human development in the Arctic. Our development as peoples is then indivisibly related to our natural surroundings. Therefore, our human rights are indivisibly related to our environment and the changing climate. Our inherent right of self-determination requires us to act responsibly and responsively to the changes around us. In the years to come, we will be rebuilding our common future. Inuit have lived in the Arctic for time immemorial, and we are in it for the long haul. We predate the invention of states and borders, and we will continue to be here. The Inuit Circumpolar Council therefore extends our hands for collaboration, for strategic partnerships, and for our common efforts to build a stronger future. Brøyana, I wish you all a good and fruitful symposium.
Thank you very much, Ms. Olsvig. Thank you for reminding us the role and the influence of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and also the fact that the rights of the Inuit people should be integral parts of any discussion or any agenda that is related to the Arctic. Sorry you couldn't be here with us. If you still hear me, I hope to see you next year. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Neil Gray, the Minister of Culture, Europe and International Development from Scotland, to come on stage. Mr. Gray, great having you with us. The stage is yours.
Good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to thank the International Polar Foundation for inviting me here today. I'm very pleased to be able to share the stage with my fellow contributors and say what a pleasure it is to be able to follow Sara's important contribution as well. This is the first time that a minister from the Scottish Government has addressed the Arctic Futures Symposium, and I hope it will not be the last. As the world's most northerly non-Arctic nation, Scotland has become a regular contributor to Arctic dialogue across Europe over the last few years. This increase in collaboration has been aided by the 2019 publication of Arctic Connections, which is Scotland's first Arctic policy framework. It's not a geopolitical statement, but rather it is a prospectus for cooperation and policy exchange on issues that are relevant to both Scotland and the Arctic regions. It illustrates the existing links, reflects on shared challenges, particularly on those stemming from climate change, rurality and remoteness, and explores avenues for even closer collaboration, the need for which has been touched on by all of my fellow speakers so far. It also highlights the importance of Scotland's relationship with the European Union. Needless to say, Scotland did not agree with Brexit. We fundamentally oppose the UK government's hard Brexit, with 62% of the people in Scotland voting to remain within the European Union in 2016. We are continuing to be an active and constructive participant with EU matters, remaining as close as we can to the EU on its policies, which will ease the process of Scotland's future return to the EU. In 2020, we were pleased to provide a contribution to the consultation on the EU's new Arctic strategy, setting out relevant Scottish expertise and our desire to remain involved in a key EU policy priority where we have so much to offer and so much to learn. I welcome the leadership shown by the EU with the publication of the new strategy last year, as Angelina highlighted in her speech, and the commitment to a safe and stable Arctic appears all the more prescient since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the suspension of the Arctic Council. And like Eivind and colleagues across Europe, Scotland stands with Ukraine and utterly condemns Russia's illegal invasion. And with the Arctic warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet, our shared commitment to international cooperation on tackling climate change couldn't be more important, again, touched upon by Eivind. The European Green Deal and Fit for 55 policies are ambitious and essential parts of the solution to the climate crisis. Scotland is doing its bit as well. Our ambitious climate change legislation sets targets and a target date for net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045, and Scotland's contribution to climate change will end, definitely, within one generation. And we are also very fortunate in Scotland to have huge potential for renewable energy generation with a current potential pipeline of over 40 gigawatts of offshore wind projects. Hydrogen will also play an important part of our net zero journey. Alongside electrification, hydrogen will play a role in decarbonising industry, transport and potentially some parts of our domestic heating systems. We aim to become a world leader in renewable hydrogen production and export. And as international demand for hydrogen grows, we are keen to work with our Arctic partners in order to facilitate the most cost-effective, sustainable and secure supply of green hydrogen to meet Europe's needs. The cross-border collaboration enabled by participation in European territorial cooperation programmes that were open to us as members of the EU was of great benefit to the country. Since 2014, more than £72 million worth in ETC grants have been secured in Scotland. The Northern Periphery and Arctic programme is of particular significance due to its thematic objectives and geographical scope. More than 40% of the projects in the current round have a Scottish partner, demonstrating that Scotland plays a vital role in the programme. However, in 2020, the UK government announced they would not commit to future ETC programmes, and this means we have been unable to shape the next round of the NPA. Despite that setback, we remain committed to working with our European neighbours and building on the successful collaborations we have established with partner countries over many years. And since the launch of our Arctic Policy Framework in 2019, we have pursued other ways to encourage Scottish Arctic collaboration. Last year, we established the Arctic Connections Fund, so far awarding more than 20 grants to Scottish organisations to work with partners in the Arctic regions on a wide range of areas such as rural depopulation and a just energy transition. These are tangible examples of us working together to increase the resilience and well-being of communities in both Scotland and the Arctic. We have worked closely with the University of the Arctic Network to increase Scottish membership from 2 universities in 2019 to 9 in 2022. Scotland now has more members than Sweden and second most of any non-Arctic nation other than China, though, grant, it's not a competition really, is it? We have also funded the establishment of the Scottish Arctic Network, not just bringing together academics and researchers, but also wider Scottish society's links to the Arctic. And I'm delighted that Edinburgh University will be hosting the Arctic Science Summit Week in 2024 on behalf of the network. We'll continue to build these people-to-people links, but we cannot replicate the value of the MPA and other ETC programmes by ourselves. And that is why the Scottish Government will continue to call for the UK to continue investment in ETC programmes, to continue the programmes from 21 into 27 financial framework. We believe there is a robust, positive business case for that to happen, regardless of our differences, which are clear and fundamental in regards to Brexit. We will have to wait to see what the outcome of that is. But in the meantime, we will continue to be a voice in favour of mutually beneficial cooperation and to build the strongest possible relationships both within the EU, Scotland and with the Arctic. I'm very sorry to say, not least to Jasper, that I must leave now for further engagements. But once again, I want to thank you all for having me along here today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium, which I hope is also incredibly productive. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Sorry to see that you leave already. But thanks for this first intervention of Scotland, and you will be invited again, so that's the message on your way out. Last but not least, it's my pleasure to invite on stage Mr. Jasper Pillen, member of the Chamber of Representatives of Belgium. Mr. Pillen, aan u het woord, het genoegen om u hier te ontvangen.
but let's speak English for now. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to deliver a keynote speech, the last one, at this already very interesting Arctic Futures Symposium. And first of all, I would like to welcome you here as a Belgian in Brussels, my capital, but also hometown of the European Union and the epicenter of NATO. In this city crowded with policymakers, every day many symposia, seminars, congresses, you name it, are being organized on many topics and challenges. And since some years, and rightly so, also on the challenges that lies ahead in the Arctic region, or regions. I took note of your interesting perspective on this, Mr. State Secretary and the ladies of the Commission and the External Action Service region or regions. But it's quite uncommon that a Belgian lawmaker, as I am as a member of the Belgian House of Representatives, is participating in this, let alone that he or she takes the floor. The following 2 days, national policymakers, representatives of the indigenous people, very interesting speech you gave, Mrs. Natural and social scientists, academics, and representatives of sectors from all different nationalities come together to strengthen the collaboration to preserve and to protect the Arctic. As mentioned, it is eventually, at last, quite common to have these debates on the European level, amongst others because of the European Union's renewal of its Arctic policy. And NATO, luckily, NATO has also become more involved. Secretary General Stoltenberg, a Norwegian, maybe that's the reason, Secretary General Stoltenberg often makes a reference to the High North. And only recently he visited the Canadian Arctic together with Prime Minister Trudeau. So organizing this symposium, this conference in Brussels, the political beating heart of the European Union and of NATO, it makes sense. But if you consider on this topic Brussels as the capital of the Kingdom of Belgium, well, some of you might be disappointed. One, Belgium does not have an Arctic strategy. Two, and this follows quite logically, Belgium is not an observer state at the Arctic Council. And three, and that's even worse, just as until recently, nobody on the political level was really bothering about the Arctic region. Elaborating our own national Arctic policy and candidating for an observer status was not on our mind, on nobody's mind. You must know I started my career as a civil servant at the Foreign Affairs Department. And before becoming a member of parliament, I was a spokesperson and a chief of staff to several Belgian federal ministers. And now I'm the vice president of the Defense Commission in the House of Representatives. And throughout my young career, and in these different functions, I realized that, especially when you compare to other EU member states, Belgium has been totally absent of the political fora concerning the Arctic region or regions. The Arctic is not cited in the official Belgian geopolitical documents, as for example the Strategic Defense Vision paper of 2016, or last year's Foreign Affairs Policy paper. The most striking thing is that the former Foreign Affairs Policy statement actually referred to Antarctica, and there are of course many good historical reasons for that, but completely ignored the Arctic region. The High North has been a black spot, a big black spot in Belgian policy making. Luckily has been, because this is about to change. And this is the reason why I'm standing here today, because I truly believe that my country has a role to play in the region. I know you can tell a lot about my often surrealistic home country. I'm standing here on the day of another train strike, for one example, to give you just one example. But just be honest, nobody can state that Belgians are full of themselves. But nevertheless, I won't do I want to state this. The Arctic, and I'm convinced about that, the Arctic needs Belgium's involvement. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I will repeat it once again, the Arctic needs Belgium. If we want to preserve the Arctic regions, if we want to protect the way of life of the indigenous people, if we want to combat climate change and its effects, if we want to work together on Arctic shipping routes, if we want to safeguard the Arctic as a peaceful region, it is of great importance to have Belgium, and of course not only Belgium, around the table, to have Belgium involved. That is one of the main reasons why I drafted and negotiated a resolution in Parliament, in the Belgian Parliament, calling upon the Belgian government to draw up an integrated Arctic strategy. This resolution was almost unanimously approved at the end of last year. Only the Communist Party voted against. Don't ask me why. The message of this text is clear. Belgium must focus on its know-how and should look for niches. We are not aiming to just copy-paste existing policy papers. We are identifying our own strengths and the assets at our disposal to make an effective Belgian contribution. And I hear some of you thinking, they got beer, they got Belgian fries, chocolate, they even have Smurfs and Manneke Pis. What in God's name is Belgium going to do, and what is going to put on the table concerning the Arctic? You see, some of you are thinking this. Well, think of our scientists, our excellence in polar research, our global seaports, such as the port of Antwerp-Bruges, my hometown, Europe's second largest port, an engine of circular economy and energy transition. Our know-how in terms of innovation, our engagement towards green investments, our expanding blue economy projects, and our very active minister, Mr. Van Quickenborne, competent for the North Sea. And even though we are a small country, our globally accepted and renowned diplomatic and international co-leadership in the fight against injustice and for a better world. I will give you another concrete example. Belgium has a long tradition of polar research, going back 125 years to 1897. On board of the Belgica, Adrien de Gerlache led the first purely scientific international expedition to Antarctica. And on a side note, with the upcoming Christmas holiday in sight, I really can recommend the recently published amazing book, Madhouse at the End of the Earth, by the British author Julian Sankton, about this expedition. It's really worth reading. Belgium laid down the basis for a better understanding of polar environments between 1905 and 1909, and this is often forgotten. De Gerlache also undertook 3 other major expeditions, but it was to the Arctic. A parallel with today is quickly drawn. While Belgian polar research was at first mainly focused on Antarctica, there was and now is an increasing interest of research towards the Arctic. Science is crucial for building a foundation to understand how our lives are impacted by climate change and what can be done to slow or reverse changes. Belgium has played an active and leading role on the polar research scene for the past 125 years. The 2022 second Polar Symposium, held in September here in Brussels, is a clear example of the wide range of expertise and know-how that Belgian polar research has to offer. 12 research groups, and I know it's not a competition, but 12 research groups based at 8 Belgian universities are currently active in Arctic scientific research. Earlier this year, Belgium was accepted as the 24th member of the International Arctic Science Committee. And just before last summer, only some months ago, the new research vessel Belgica was baptized. The ship will allow our scientists to conduct marine research in the most innovative way possible. In 2023, the new Belgica will sail to Greenland to conduct marine and biology research. the Belgica is one of the best equipped high-tech research vessels in Europe. And since the vote on my resolution that passed the plenary last year, things have been moving. Our new Minister of Foreign Affairs included the High North in her annual policy paper. An integrated Arctic policy is now drawn up by the Foreign Affairs Department and the excellent Egmont Institute. It is now upon the government, the parliament, the scientists, the academics, the enterprises, the seaports and other stakeholders to work together at first, and then, once the work is done, to promote the Belgian ACES and values. Before you stands an optimistic man. Ladies and gentlemen, I conclude. What happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. Former Norwegian Minister Vidar Helgesen stated some years ago. He was right, he is right. In the coming years, all the challenges of these times will come together around the North Pole. Climate change, energy, resources and supply, intercontinental transport, rights of indigenous people, wildlife protection, militarization, everything will come together there. It is our collective duty to collaborate, to protect and to preserve. And it is my deep conviction that Belgium can play an important role in tackling these challenges together with all the allies and with all the other stakeholders of good intention. I wish you all a very interesting symposium. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Optimistic Pillen. Thank you for your remarks, and thanks for being such an active player to make sure that the Arctic does not remain that black spot that you referred to. And I will maybe summarize your intervention by the fact that, I remember I wrote it down, the Arctic needs Belgium, at least around the table, right? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, these were our keynote speakers for today. I would like to thank them again. Thank you for your presence and your interventions.